Yep, it's another outdoor channel. What's going on, everybody? My name is Dave, and this is a channel that I like to call Off Grid. And on this channel, we talk about everything backpacking, car camping, day hiking, glamping. I do a bunch of giveaways, and I'm also a big gear nerd. So if any of those things interest you, please consider sticking around and subscribing to the channel. If none of those things interest you, maybe you've come to the wrong channel, but I'd still love it if you'd stick around anyway. So in today's episode, in the intro video, I was going to just do a little bit of a this is who I am, this is what the channel is about, and I'm also going to dive into 5 beginner tips that I would have liked to have known when I first started camping. So let's get into a little bit about myself. Man, it sounds like I'm on a job interview or something. Like, here's my resume and here are my referrals. So a little bit about me. Well, I'm fairly new to the hiking and backpacking community. I only really got started about, I'd say a little bit over a year ago at the end of like late 2019 into 2020. So even though I'm fairly new, I have picked up a lot along the way. I've done a ridiculous amount of research so far, and I have a bunch of trips under my belt for 2020 that I'll get into a little bit for you guys in the future. But basically, I like to break down the goal of this channel into 3 major parts. The first part is really going to be centered around giving back, and it's going to be in a couple of the different pointers here. But the first part is going to be giving back, and the first way I'm going to give back is hopefully giving back to you guys, not only through the giveaways, but also through the content that I create here on this channel. The second thing that I'm going to hopefully do on this channel is to give back for the National Park Service. So I'm dedicating right now 10% of all of my proceeds and all of the money that I earn on this channel and off this channel too through other means to the NPS service. You can find more about that in my About section on my channel. But I really wanted to give back to an awesome service that really helps keep our national parks as awesome as they already are. And then the third thing that I want to do with this channel is to give back to other YouTubers. I really want this to be an awesome community. I feel like it already is. It's a well-connected community with a bunch of the other YouTubers, so I really want to stay connected with that group, and then also try to tap into other areas and give shout outs to new YouTubers who are new to the scene. So let's dive into the other part of the video, which is my 5 beginner tips that I wish I knew personally before I went out on the trail and before I went camping. So tip number 1 is going to be do your research, and not only for the trips that you're going to be on, but also for the gear that you're going to do. You have to do an insane amount of research before you head out there, and that's really important because you want to make sure that when you head out there, you're as prepared as possible to have an amazing time. Because if you're not, and I see this all the time, there's a bunch of times where people end up going out on the trail totally unprepared, and they go out with clothing that doesn't really suit the trail, they go out with gear that doesn't really suit the trail, and they go out that one time or maybe a couple times, they have a horrible time, they have a horrible night's sleep, and they never do it again. So I want to make sure that you guys avoid that if you've come to this video looking for beginner tips. And then obviously the other side of that coin is going to be doing your research for whatever trail you're going on. It doesn't really matter if it is day hiking, car camping, backpacking. You have to do your research for when you hit the trail. And that obviously sounds pretty obvious, but at the same time, you have to make sure that you do that proper research. You get that proper research in. You want to make sure that you're not only looking at the trail that you're going to, but research things like, how do I get to the trailhead? Because that's not always clear. Research things like your altitude, what the weather is going to be like. That's the most obvious one. But also, what are your altitude gains? What are your elevation gains? But also your elevation decreases too. You want to make sure that you have as much detail going in to set you up for success. You can't always rely on cell service, obviously, when you're going off grid, and you also can't always rely on the topo maps like Gaia and things like that when you're out in the field. Not only from just a generic running out of battery or juice type of thing, but if you're not super skilled at knowing where your bearings are or where you're going to be located, doing that research ahead of time really helps you before you head out into the field. And then obviously things like altitude altitude and where you're going to be at. If you're used to living in an area that is very low in altitude and elevation, and you're going to a hike that's 5,000 feet or higher in elevation, then you might end up sucking wind pretty hard when you're out there. So you have to not necessarily acclimate yourself to that climate, but you do have to build up some sort of resistance or immunity to and endurance to that type of environment. And that kind of leads me to step number 2, or tip number 2, and that's going to be start out slow. You don't want to necessarily rush into a huge trip on your first outing. You want to make sure that you are prepared enough, like you're doing your research, like I had mentioned in tip number 1, but you also want to make sure that you are acclimated enough to that type of environment before just rushing right into it. So starting slow basically means going to camp in your backyard, if you have a backyard, going to some car camping trips first. And I would recommend just doing overnighters when you're first going out there. You don't want to have to deal with crazy amounts of weather or amounts of miles or anything like that. You shouldn't really have to worry about that kind of stuff the first time you're heading out to enjoy a camping trip. And that's really something that I think a lot of people might overlook, is the fact that you really want to enjoy being out there and enjoy being out in the backcountry. So in order to do that, you kind of have to build up your endurance for that type of environment first. So that would be the second tip that I have for you, would be to start out slow. And then as you build up your endurance and you're used to, especially if you're looking into doing more backpacking, I would say also to increase the weight a little by little as you go out there. Another big mistake that I see a lot of people end up doing is they end up like taking 30, 40 pounds of gear the first time they end up going out on a trip. So, I would definitely recommend not bringing really nearly as much as you think you would definitely need, but also being as comfortable as you possibly can be, and then weight training, almost like putting that stuff on your back, seeing how it feels, and then like walking around town with it, or doing a day hike with the weight that you're planning on carrying with your backpacking trip on your day hike. So that way you're getting used to the weight before you head out there on your first backpacking trip. So the number 3 tip that I have for you is kind of a difficult one to explain. I kind of like to put that into 2 different types of categories, and the one category I'm going to put it into is, are you sure if you're going to actually go out there, and are you sure this is something that you want to get into? And the second one is going to be, are you unsure if you want to go out there? And that's really kind of difficult to really know until you actually start buying a bunch of gear and start planning some trips as to whether or not you really want to get out there or not. I know me personally, when I first started out, I didn't know if I really wanted to do this more. I thought I was gonna like maybe go out there once or twice, kind of feel it out and see if I really enjoyed it, and then I would kind of build off of that. But I kind of did it wrong, and I think a lot of would-be backpackers or people who are thinking about getting into it or interested in getting into it end up buying a bunch of gear first, kind of like I did, just not really having any knowledge and not really having any kind of other types of specifics in mind about what they want to get into, and then they end up just blowing a bunch of money on some pretty crummy gear that they're never really going to use again or hardly ever use again. And that's really what you want to avoid. You don't want to like make the same mistakes that a lot of us make. So that's why I say, are you sure that you want to get into this, or are you not sure? And if you are not sure, which you might be, especially if you're watching this video, then you might want to consider doing some kind of rental service through like an REI or something like that, or borrowing a friend's gear setup if they have an extra backpack or some other things that you might be missing for your first trip when you want to try to get out into the backcountry, and then really just trying that out and seeing how that feels, seeing if that piques your curiosity and your interest in it, and seeing if you want to get into it more. You could find out that you go out there and you just hate it, so why go out there anymore than you need to, or then you kind of want to. If it's something that you just really don't like, then get out. Like, don't do it. Like, why are you spending your time on it? Don't force it if it's something that you really don't like to do. Tip number 4. This is going to be plan for 3 seasons, is basically what this tip is going to be. And what that means is spring, summer, and fall. You want to plan for those 3 seasons in particular, because I think most backpackers, most campers end up going out during those seasons. Only the really seasoned veterans and hardcore backpackers end up going out into winter and end up either snowshoeing or going out into really low temperatures. But for the majority of you out there, and for me personally too, I only end up really going out for a 3-season type of gear. And what I mean by planning for 3 seasons is look at the type of gear that can get you through every single one of those seasons. Something that's versatile enough that can get you down into the high 20s at night, and that's degrees in Fahrenheit, or all the way up into 70s and 80s. I don't usually like to go up any higher than the 70s myself, but especially at night because it gets kind of gross. But you want to plan for those 3 seasons so that you can have a really overall and like great system. That way you're not buying extra gear to try and make certain things work for one type of temperature and then having to think, oh, well, this other trip is going to be much colder, so I have to grab a different type of sleeping bag or pad or quilt or whatever to acclimate to that type of weather. So having a really versatile kit and making sure that you're prepared for all 3 seasons is tip number 4. And then my last tip for you, tip number 5, is going to be to buy your sleeping bag, your tent, and your sleeping pad before you ever buy your backpack. And I know that sounds a little crazy, that sounds a little weird and off, but it's also very important. You want to make sure ultimately that you're buying a backpack that fits the biggest gear that you can fit into it. So if you buy your backpack first, you're not necessarily doing your homework and making sure that those other biggest items that you're going to fit into that backpack are actually going to fit. If you go out there and you buy a 30 or 40 liter pack and then you end up buying gear that's too big for the pack, you're never going to be able to carry it and lug it with you on the trail. If you end up buying something that is huge, like a 60 or 70 liter pack, you might find out that you're going to end up rolling that top roll down way too far, and then you're just going to have a lot of wasted space. So you want to make sure that you buy your tent, your sleeping bag or sleeping quilt, as well as your sleeping pad first before you end up buying your backpack. And that's obviously assuming that you're going with a tent style setup instead of a hammock style setup. Obviously, I would definitely recommend, if it's your first time going out, sticking with a tent rather than a hammock, because hammocks, while they're a lot more customizable and you can fine tune it in a lot of different ways, it might not fit everybody and every style of sleeper as well. So that's going to do it for my welcome video. Thanks so much for stopping by. If you like what you saw today, please give me the thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification. That's important for a couple of different reasons too, and you might not know this from other channels, but not only do you hear about new videos that are coming out, but you'll also hear about anytime I post something in that community or that discussion tab. And that's really important because I'm going to be posting questions for you guys. I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear what your feedback is. I'll be posting polls out there, but I'll also be posting the information about giveaways that I'm going to be doing on this channel in that discussion tab. So that's where you're going to get the heads up on all that stuff. So hit that bell notification to be alerted of all this stuff that I have coming out. And in my very first shout out, I'd like to give a shout out to a channel called Basecamp Chris. This guy is over in Nevada and he has some amazing content. If you haven't heard about him yet, get on over to his channel and check it out. I'll put a link in the cards and then also in the description down below for his channel. He has amazing content. He's one of the best on-trail cinematographers that I've seen. He has a really good style and a way that he ends up shooting his videos. And he also does a lot of storytelling when he's out on the trail too. He's been out there for a really long time too. He has a ton of experience under his belt. And if you're interested in Osprey backpacks, almost 100% guaranteed that he's done a review on it at some point. So he's a huge Osprey fan. He has a lot of great gear videos as well. So definitely check that guy out if you haven't already. So that's gonna do it for me this week, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Head on out there, enjoy the outdoors. And if you're planning on going off grid, make sure that you enjoy it, but you also make it a safe one. Until next week, guys, I'll see you on the next one.